Every now and then I receive questions about my sporeboard, its construction, how it's attached to the machine, and general maintenance questions. So I'm going to attempt to answer all of these here in this one video. So let's have a look at how the tabletop is constructed. We start here with this here, box section steel. The table is constructed on a steel bed, and that gives the tabletop rigidity. The last thing you want is something that's going to warp, buckle or twist. So you've got to have a good foundation on which to build your tabletop. Bolted to that is this piece of MDF. It's 18 millimeters or 3/4 of an inch thick. This provides the platform on which the rest of the tabletop is going to be built. The next piece to be added are the T-slots. These T-slots are designed to take 8mm bolts, and they work really well on my table. I have mine spaced about 10 inches or 250mm apart. These ones are 18mm high. Between the T-slots goes these here, pieces of MDF. These are also 18mm or 3/4 of an inch high. Now it is important that this here be the same height as your T-slot. If they're not, you need to either machine them lower to match or build them up. But they need to be the same height as your T-slot. The next piece to go on is this one here. It's a piece of 12mm MDF. And it's put on and covers the ends of the T-slots here. And that's important, and I'll show you why shortly. The final piece to go on is another piece of 12mm MDF. Now, from here down is the tabletop. From here up is the sacrificial board system. We should never be cutting into this section here of tabletop. So when this is constructed, this is bolted down to the box section steel. The next piece here is glued and screwed down to this board here. The next piece is glued onto this board, and the top piece is glued on. Now you can use screws when you're gluing the boards down. So these two here, you can put screws and glue it, put screws in it while the glue is drying. But once the glue is dry, it's important to remove the screws. You do not want any screws in this tabletop to be above the level of the T-slots. Why is that? Because in a tabletop with only a single screw in it, the cutter will find it almost every time. Any cutter hitting a screw will destroy the cutter. You don't want any cutters or any screws above the level of the T-slot. If you're cutting down as far as the T-slot, you've got big problems, and screws will probably be the least of them. So, no screws above the level of the T-slot. Now, why do I want the MDF to cover the edge of the T-slot? When you've got your holding clamp in there, and I pull against it, I'm actually pulling between here and the T-slot. Because these cover, I'm actually pulling between, my pulling force goes down through the MDF here, through the T-slot, and the T-slot is effectively being pulled against itself. If the MDF didn't cover it, I'll be pulling the T-slot straight up, and I'll be relying on the screws that hold it in place. As it stands, I could remove the screws holding the T-slot in place, and the T-slot still wouldn't pull out. So by having that MDF cover, I'm actually making those T-slots a lot stronger. I will not be able to pull them out. Don't cover them, there's a chance I will pull them out. So that's why it's important. This is the same level, so that this one here can cover those T-slots properly and provide a much stronger holding for them. So I've got some questions here from a viewer, and he asked that do I glue or screw my sporeboard onto the table? And of course I glue it on. And what are the advantages of that? I have here a standard screw used for woodworking and other things. And if you've ever tried cutting one of these, you'll know these things are as hard as. And if you hit a cutter with this at speed, or if you hit a cutter with this full stop, you're going to be throwing the cutter away. It will just destroy it. The other advantage of not screwing it in place is if I put my screw here, when I screw my spoil board on, this spoil board's 12 millimeters thick. I can only screw, I'd have to screw about 6 millimeters into there. I couldn't really afford to go too much deeper or I'd lose my holding. So by screwing this here, it means I can only use 6 millimeters of my 12 millimeter spoil board. But it actually is worse than that. I would have to provide a little bit of clearance because just to make sure I didn't accidentally cut into them. So I need probably 2 millimeters of clearance to ensure I didn't hit them. That's assuming everything went right. And so I can only use 4 millimeters of my 12 millimeter spoil board. It's hardly worth even putting the thing on. I'm going to be pulling it off and throwing it away before I've even started scratching the surface of it. So screws, not a good idea. Gluing is the only way of holding your spoil board in place. Next one is, do I glue new boards on, or do I take them off and just replace them entirely? So I actually just glue my new spoil board on top of the old one. I don't take it off. The only reason I would take an old spoil board right back down to the next layer, the first layer of 12 millimeter NDF, is if it had delaminated. If it's delaminated, yes, I'd have to take it all the way back and glue my new board on. But if it hasn't delaminated, there's no reason to do that. Just glue your new board right on top. Finally, at what level would I replace the spoil board, and what is its final depth? So I would replace my spoil board when it starts getting down to that 12 millimeter. So basically once I'm 12 millimeters, half an inch above my T-slots, I'll replace my spoil board. I will put a new piece of 12 millimeter on, which will give me an overall 25 inch above the T-slot. So I'll machine it down to half an inch above the T-slot and then replace it with another half inch to take me back up to an inch. And I hover between 1 and half an inch above the T-slot. And I think that's about right for my machine. Obviously, depending on your machine, your figures may be different. You don't want a huge spoil board on a very, very small machine. It would be ridiculous. On a big machine though, an inch is probably more than enough. It's certainly about right for mine. Well, I hope you found that useful and will be able to incorporate some of these ideas into your own tabletop spoil board. Join me next time when I'll be replacing this failed hard drive in my laptop. I need to reinstall Mac 3 and get it up and running as it used to be. I think you'll be surprised how quickly and easily it can be done. Don't forget to subscribe, and I'll catch you guys later. Cheers!